Welcome to the Marshall Pruitt Podcast and our Week in IndyCar series for February 20th, presented to you by our good friends at Cooper Tires and also our dear friends at the Justice Brothers, makers of fine additives, cleaners, and lubricants for the automotive, heavy equipment, agricultural, and industrial worlds. Do apologize, dear listener. The one free gift that I got from Circuit of the Americas, IndyCar Spring Training, this head cold, flu, chest, I don't know what. It's still here. It's fighting. It's lingering. But hopefully it will be departing and free from this little voice of mine before the end of the week. We do have our pals Charlie Kimball making a return. Charlie's always a favorite guest of the show. And also added in one of my oldest friends, Michael Cannon, race engineer at Dale Coyne Racing, with the spring training COTA event being something that there was so much learned, so many things that came out of it, both on the tire front, the just general setup front. I figured, hey, we needed to have two guests this week, so we start off with Charlie, and then we move into Michael. Both of them had a ton of great questions that you sent in via Facebook, Twitter, and Reddit. And yeah, we get good stuff from Charlie speaking about his year, the adjustments he's having to make, going from being a full-time driver to now part-time, and his efforts to hopefully come back to full-time in the near future. The new advanced frontal protection device is certainly something that was spoken on by both of our guests. Interesting there, and I'll get into that a little bit of my own. And as usual, y'all were kind enough to send in some questions for me to open with. I'll get to those here momentarily. Doing a bit of a cool thing, fun thing, I hope, and that is got brand new and or heavily revised 2019 logos are going to be coming out for the Week in IndyCar and my two other shows, the Week in Sports Cars and the brand new Inside the Sports Car Paddock. And with those, our awesome friends at TorontoMotorsports.com going to be making new t-shirts, some hats are coming. There's all kinds of great stuff. So with that said, if you want to take a moment and visit TorontoMotorsports.com and do a little search there on the site for Marshall Pruitt podcast stuff, our man Derek Koska, who owns Toronto Motorsports, has already knocked a pretty significant price off of everything that is left over from 2018. There isn't a ton, but there's certainly still some stock left over from last year, t-shirts in particular, where they have taken a nice percentage off, and also with a new little drive here to help, I guess you could say, clear out the Week in IndyCar and also Week in Sports Cars t-shirts. Derek has come up with an additional discount if you use the code MPP, that being the abbreviation for Marshall Pruitt Podcast. If you use MPP at checkout, there is an even bigger discount available. So doing our best to get 2018's goodies out the door and hopefully in your hands, as I hear someone accelerating hard outside. And then we've got some fun, cool stuff coming, as I mentioned, for 2019 t-shirts, baseball caps, for all those three shows. Plus there's something new. We're going to save it. I don't know. It's not like it's a major thing, but we're going to have something new too. I guess a fourth edition, if you are a fan of this crazy little thing that's become a thing. And that is the Hamburger and French Fry Show. The as often as we can, end of day video wrap up and insight videos that my man Sebastian Bourdais and I happen to do at IndyCar rounds, even some sports car rounds too. I told Seb back in the day, hey, I'll get a t-shirt made for you or a hat or something as payment for your help and volunteering and doing these videos. And that turned into me speaking to my friend Roger Warwick, the artist Roger Warwick, saying, Raj, can you come up with something, some sort of little logo? And he did. It was perfect. It's me as a hamburger, Seb as a box of French fries. And so those stickers, we had some of those made up. Those were a lot of fun. And that's now evolved into, I said, hey, it would be great, Derek, if you can make up just a handful of t-shirts, a couple for me, a couple for Seb and his family, just for me to give to him as a thank you. And so having printed those off at TorontoMotorsports.com, had some folks come into the shop and say, hey, what are those? And then say, can we buy one or some? And so something that was meant to be just a little gift and a payment to Seb by swag has turned into something that actually TorontoMotorsports.com is going to start making and selling to anyone who wants their hamburger and french fry t-shirts, and hats will be coming in a little bit. So the reason I'm mentioning this maybe a little bit more heavily is both Seb and I said, okay, if we're going to give Toronto Motorsports the green light, we want this to actually do something good. And so we said, hey, happy for you if you want to make those and sell those, but we want a significant portion of the profits to go towards the Wilson Children's Fund, the charity fund that was established to support our late friend, someone that Sebastian was very close to, and someone who was pretty close to a best friend for me, that being Justin Wilson. So, cool thing about this, any of the hamburger and french fry t-shirts you buy from TorontoMotorsports.com, also be doing something cool here. And the hats too when they're available. So it'll be something cool. Buy one of those, and the Wilson Children's Fund is going to benefit from it. And we might even come up with the hamburger and french fry pack. I don't know, maybe the hamburger and french fry Happy Meal, which is a t-shirt, a hat, and a sticker when all those items are ready. So anyways, trying to do some fun stuff. Also trying to do some stuff that maybe does help out those that we care for, that being Jane and Jess, and obviously the awesome Mrs. Wilson, who we love dearly. So there for Jules and the girls, that's a little something we're going to be trying to do. Going to catch up a little bit on a couple of topical items before I get into the questions you've sent in for me. And a number of folks say, hey, what's going on with Pato O'Ward? Any news? Can you share it with us? Can't at this point. Can mention that I did speak with Pato on Monday, and he did say that he had some very good things in motion. Nothing that he could announce as of yet, but it did sound like if one or more of those plans come together, he could be in a position where he would be in a fairly competitive situation in 2019. Might even be something that has him, if all these things work this year, that sets him up for 2020, and something that might be even more competitive than what he would have had if he had stayed with the Harding-Steinbrenner team, or maybe even accepted the offer Michael Andretti said that was made to him. Another quick thing to mention, and this is just, again, following up from last week's Week in IndyCar, where Katie Hargett, the awesome Katie Hargett, my pal Katie and I, hosted the majority of the show together. And a lot of folks say, look, I hear what you guys said. I hear what you said about Pato and that Michael Andretti offer. Heard about, hey, it's hard for anyone to try and stick with Harding, knowing that the Andretti offer to do 8 races would have still kept Pato contracted to Harding, having to hand over his $1 million Indy Lights prize to Harding, and then Harding would have paid that over to Andretti. Hear what you guys are saying. I think it was me particularly that was the process we've heard was suggested would have to happen. Would not have been a direct signing to Andretti, but got to stick with Harding, got to give him your money, and then that'll be funneled over to the Andretti team as part of that deal. And how, knowing how things have collapsed between Harding and Pato, that would have been a pretty ugly and uncomfortable thing. And a lot of folks, basically, feedback was, so what? Deal with it, suck it up. That's going to be the best thing. Do it. Just deal with it. Why wouldn't you do that? A number of folks have called out Pato for just being dumb, young, arrogant, a variety of things for not taking Michael's offer. You may be correct. You may be proven absolutely correct. I know that, again, knowing more about the situation than maybe I can fully put in print or here on the podcast, the one thing I didn't hear being offered in this scenario with Andretti was anything long-term. It sounded more short-term. So despite all the relationship stuff, the dysfunction, forgetting all of that, even forgetting how competitive a car might be with Andretti for 8 rounds this year, I think, if I'm advising Pato or any other young, talented driver who we think has the potential to be a future champion, it's one thing where you say, look, you only get that $1 million from Indy Lights and IndyCar once. You've got one shot to use it. What's going to be best for you? Is it trying to do approximately a half season with Andretti? Burn up that money. We have to believe, if it's 8 races, that $1 million would have only gotten Pato through half of them. If we look back at what is offered, what is said in the awarding of that amount each year, it's always said that the prize is for 4 races, 3, call them standard races, plus the Indy 500. So if that $1 million is meant to cover the budget for 4 races, Michael's offering 8. It does sound like, whether it's out of pocket from himself or from some of the existing team sponsors, that the Andretti team could have been willing to make an investment into Pato. Keep in mind that's 8 races they were talking about, and in theory the kid's season would have been over, and he would have had no money left afterwards to do anything. I'm thinking from an advisement standpoint, if you have that on the table, do 8, spend everything, and hope you can fortify something to come back in 2020 starting from $0. You might have shown well, might have won a race, might have even shown well, but if you've only done half the season and have no money left to continue, that's a story a lot of drivers have. Hey, I did a handful of events, did what I could afford, I've got nothing, and look at Sage Karam. This is a kid who we hear constantly, man, we want him back, he deserves a ride full-time. Can't argue with any of that. We also know that he had his shot. It was not a full season thing. It was something where he was able to show considerable aptitude at some events, didn't have the money to do more, and his career has really been kind of an Indy-only thing at a very young age. A lot of folks find themselves in that hole. A lot of folks in an award situation who have spent that money, done a limited program, then really struggled to grow beyond that. Kyle Kaiser's another one. In 2018, he had that $1 million, did his 4 races. At least as of right now in 2019, he's got 1 race listed. And so, I mention those things because of some of the teams that I believe Pato is speaking with that combined might be able to put him in a car full-time this year. Again, hindsight will tell us whether he made the wrong move by turning down Andretti's half season, where they, I think, would have been putting in some money to make that happen, versus saying, no, I'm going to actually start from scratch, hold on to that $1 million, talk with some other teams, and see if and what I could make happen that might be a full season. And if that is what the kid can make happen, even if the car or cars he'll be in this year might not be as scary fast as an Andretti Honda, I still think that might end up being the right call. But again, it's a great thing. We're here on February 20th and speculating. Time will tell whether the kid was right to turn down Michael's offer, or if this is the all-time boneheaded move that holds him back and limits his career moving forward. One of the items that we speak with Michael Cannon about a little later was about the new Advanced Forward Protection Device, the AFP. Caught a lot of people by surprise. And I'm not necessarily speaking about fans and listeners, but even some of those within the paddock had shot me notes saying, I had no idea. No idea it was coming, or I didn't think it was going to be this. Seems like there might still be a little bit of work for IndyCar to do if just getting everyone involved with the cars, will be running them, turning wrenches on them, doing the engineering and such. Sounds like there still might be a little bit of an information gap or knowledge gap as to what the device is meant to do, how it might impact the car, the timeline involved with getting them installed. They're not a bolt-on item right now. There's going to have to be a fair amount of time and effort invested to prepare the tubs for that. Michael and I speak about that a little bit later. So, yeah, it's not the most time-friendly thing, knowing when this is happening on the calendar, but again, folks will adapt and make it happen to the best of their abilities. All right, let's move on to the questions you had for me, and then we're going to welcome in our man Charlie Kimball, all courtesy of Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers. Jordan Darwin says, Marshall, has the AFP device been run in any of the tests recently? I did not recall seeing it at Laguna or Cota. Jordan, I have not had a chance. I've tried, but not had any luck so far trying to get an answer on that from the series. I know that in the press release they distributed yesterday, there was an inference that something like this has been on cars in the recent past. Again, at least for my memory, I'm failing to remember those instances. So I'm not saying that IndyCar is wrong, just saying I don't remember if and when they might have been on cars in the last 5, 10, 15 years. But we will see there. I think we can safely assume that since we had renderings of the AFP, and knowing that they came from Chris Beatty, contracted by IndyCar to do 3D modeling. Chris is the same person that IndyCar used for their Universal Aero Kit conceptualization, and so I would say that if we're just going off of recent examples, it's very likely that IndyCar's Tino Belli, part of the engineering and technical group there, probably worked very closely with Chris on this in terms of just the images and such. And knowing Tino, I'm sure he has done all manner of CFD and as much simulation and testing as possible, virtual testing of this device, and has come to a conclusion that it will meet some of the needs for driver cockpit safety improvement. As for whether it has been, prototypes have been made, installed on a tub, and subjected to at real-world load testing, and items thrown at it and strikes taking place, that I cannot speak to. Again, that is a significant part of the puzzle that I'm hoping to solve in getting a hold of someone from IndyCar's competition department there. So once I get more of that, obviously I'm going to write about it immediately, because a lot of folks have asked, hey, where did this come from? Has it been subjected to actual testing? What do we know about it? And how much help do we think it will provide compared to the Aero screen that was tested a few times last year? On that subject, too, I've had some folks say, hey, what about the Aero screen? Is that thing coming back? Is this AFP just a stopgap thing, just until they get the Aero screen exactly to where they want it? I can't speak for the windscreen, the Aero screen itself, as for whether that will indeed be coming back in 2020 or beyond. I do know that the AFP is not meant to be, or at least right now, it's not anticipated to be a permanent solution. This is it. This is the best we got. There's nothing better we can do, and it's staying on the car until the next Dallara chassis is commissioned. I do believe the mindset right now is this is a very good thing for 2019, but we are working on other things for 2020. I do believe that is very much the case with IndyCar. I can't say, though, whether that does involve further evolutions of the Aero screen in the Aero screen being the solution for 2020, or if there is something different altogether. I've heard suggestion that there is something different altogether that could be coming for 2020. So I have no idea as to what it might be. If it's just, say, a radically different version of the Aero screen than what we've seen. The thing we'd heard, I know a couple folks have referenced hearing something from NBC's Jan Beekes mentioned this somewhere, and it lines up with something that I had heard in recent months as well, about with testing of the Aero screen, the most recent testing of the Aero screen in terms of bench testing and firing things at it to see how it performs. There had been talk about deflection and its inability to deflect bigger, heavier things as much as they'd hoped that it would. That wouldn't surprise me, to be honest. Looking at the Aero screen design, knowing that while there is a rigid mount at the base, the part that the separate piece, I believe it was a 3D printed type piece, which not only bolted the Aero screen to that device, but that device then bolted to the chassis. At the base, of course, you have a lot of bolts holding this opticore material made by PPG. Hard, definitely nuts and bolts and washers, things hitting the aero screen low near those mounting points. Again, from what I've heard, in that location, things were, let's just say, fine. Things that were higher up on the windscreen, where there is nothing up top that is rigid, it's just strictly relying on the opticore material itself, without something hard and effectively maintaining the shape of the aero screen on the top of the material, that you had it, deflecting too much. I don't know if folding is the right way to put it. Folding might give the wrong visual impression, but again, it doesn't surprise me that something that has the ability to flex slightly, even though this opticore is pretty amazing for keeping things from piercing directly through it. If you have the bottom side of the material held in place, rigid manner, bolted in place, and the top is not, it wouldn't surprise me that without some sort of carbon fiber ring, metal ring of some sort up top, holding that in position as well, that it might deflect, bend, or fold to some capacity with heavy things being thrown at it. So, not sure where that leads, not sure what IndyCar does with that, but as I mentioned on some of the earlier questions about this, I'm hoping to get downloaded all kinds of stuff about this. That was meant to happen last week at Circuit of the Americas, but I was told, hey, please hold off. We're not quite there yet, so still waiting for that to happen. Let's see. We'll also go to Jordan again, who asks, hey, how does IndyCar pick and when and where to stream its test days? He said IndyCar's test at Laguna and then 2 days at COTA, but out of those 3, only 1 day at COTA happened to be covered. He says, we fans are clamoring for any IndyCar action we can get, so let IndyCar know that we love more content. Definitely hear you, Jordan. I would say it's also where folks like myself and my friend David Malsher and my friend Jim Aiello and some of the others who cover IndyCar on a full-time basis, it's kind of meant to be where we fill in. So, keep in mind that test days in most series are not big public affairs in terms of we're sending TV trucks and spending a whole bunch of money so you can see testing take place. What we tend to see this happen is at official test days, like a spring training, whether it was at Phoenix more recently or now at Circuit of the Americas. Having those cameras in place for the first day of action definitely was great to see. The fact that there wasn't something on the second day at COTA, I know, and I was a bit oblivious to this, but I know that some folks were very surprised that they would not get both days. Laguna as well. Laguna was not an official open test day. That was actually a private day secured by Team Penske, and I believe every single team, barring one, said, hey, can we join in? They were kind enough to say yes. The track asked, hey, guys, do you think we could open this up since we're trying to build some a new fan base or returning fan base for the season finale? All those teams are really cool and said yes, so the paddock was open. Folks could buy their ticket and come and watch, so that was great. But again, this is not a big structured IndyCar thing. It was just all the teams themselves saying, oh, let's go to Laguna, let's go test there and get ready for the September race. So asking IMS Productions or NBC or whatever to send 5 or 10 18-wheelers out to Laguna and then string 100 miles worth of cable around the place with cameras for a one-day private test. There's nobody that I know that has a budget for such a thing to do something like that for a private test. So I hear you, Jordan, no question. I wish money was so flush that private test days, heck, Ganassi and Foyt were just at Sebring on Monday, I believe, on the short course. I hope we get to a point where IndyCar has enough money and NBC is making so much off of the relationship that they can indeed dispatch trucks everywhere anytime you get multiple IndyCars on track. But I think this is just more a case of so many things like this are becoming possible, or there's snippets of it that maybe sometimes we forget. Some of this stuff is just meant to be private testing. Not everything is open for everyone. We're thankful for those who do decide to open up their private tests, but that's also a case where if I'm at Laguna, which I was, or COTA, trying to crank out as many videos as I can to be that conduit, and I'm sure others can and will and do the same thing from other media outlets. So maybe it just means that we need to do a better job of trying to get you more so you can see more when the networks aren't there to bring things to life. We're going to go to Zachary Campbell next. He says, "Hey Marsh, with the excitement around the Gold Coast and the possibility of that coming back to the 2020 schedule, have the discussions around Richmond or Chicagoland taken a back seat when it comes to possible future venues? Haven't heard anything about ranking of priority, meaning, hey, we're kind of hot and heavy on Gold Coast and that might go somewhere, so we're going to push these others aside. If anything, it sounds like the date and scheduling for the Gold Coast might end up being the thing that kind of takes it off the calendar. We'll see what happens there, obviously, but other than a willingness, it does sound like fitting it in is going to be the biggest challenge, knowing that IndyCar CEO Mark Miles is someone who really does not want to end the series at an international event, really would prefer it to fit before the season. The domestic season here in the States kicks off, and so, again, that is where I've seen the challenges there, which makes me believe for sure that Steven Starks and the rest of the IndyCar team, the ones that would be doing the negotiations, Jay Fry as well, I would not think they would say apportion the majority of their time and effort towards Gold Coast and leaving a Richmond or Chicagoland or otherwise in a backseat position. I think they might actually, if there's something to be made happening there on an oval, which we know IndyCar wants to get at least one more back on for 2020, I think it might actually be the other way around, where they might be trying to advance those first and foremost, since in theory those would be able to fit easier within the domestic calendar. Let's go to RSACA from the lovely IndyCar Reddit group, who says, "Hey Marshall, do you know what options are currently on the table for Pato Award?" Says it's frustrating to see Herta on top at COTA when Pato should have gotten the opportunity to show his skills as well. Can't argue with the last bit of Pato should have gotten the opportunity. I mean, the team signed him to a contract, said they would pay him money to drive, said that everything would be taken care of, and then delivered on absolutely none of it. So I would, again, cannot argue that was frustrating to see play out. I wouldn't say it's frustrating to see Herta on top. I love the fact that we have a super talented young driver showing that he's awesome and has great potential. And I would say during the off season, maybe has taken a few extra steps as well, grown just as you would expect a young driver to do coming out of Indy Lights, and rocks up for his first IndyCar test of the new season and is showing folks the fast way around Circuit of the Americas. So I think that was the opposite of frustrating, at least for me. Great to see that, and just as someone who's always been a huge supporter of young open-wheel talent, American or otherwise, that makes me super happy. As for options, I think I mentioned many of them last week on the podcast with our pal Kitty Hargett. More than happy to run back through them again. I mentioned this next part just because it's a fairly normal thing, and I know that a lot of reporters, folks that have essentially everyone's phone number, there are many folks who happily help those who ask for contact info, so this is not unique to me, but I know that I have sent contact info Pato's way for Carlin Racing, Chip Ganassi, Dale Coyne. Dale actually texted me. Again, I think I might have mentioned this last week as well. Dale texted me in the middle of the first practice session, first test session at COTA from the timing stand saying, "Hey, is this Pato's correct number?" And he actually had an old number, so I corrected that and sent him the new one. But I know that Pato has new contact info for Carlin Racing, Chip Ganassi Racing, Dale Coyne Racing. Who else? He already has Harding Racing, so didn't need to send that his way. Juncos Racing as well, he already had, so I know that. I believe sent him Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan's contact info, and I don't think he needed much more after that. So, yeah, I mean, that's, half the teams, more than half the teams, I think, maybe, in the paddock. And so, would I be surprised if somewhere among those teams, he might find something for some races, maybe something for a few more elsewhere? Again, all interesting to track and see here. And we'll find out, hopefully the kid can come to terms with one or more to get his behind in a race car, so that the only thing we have to talk about is how the reigning Indy Lights champ does in either a partial or a full season. Let's go to Ryan Ward next. I love folks who send in things that call me out, and rightfully so. It says, MP, I noticed a glaring absence or two when you and Hargett were discussing potential champions last week. Ryan says, Joseph Newgarden has 7 wins over the last 2 seasons, and Will Power has 6 wins to Dixon and Rossi's 4 apiece, yet neither of them entered the conversation as far as potential champions were concerned. What gives? No respect for Team Penske or Chevy in 2019? Again, seriously, I love questions like this. It's not all meant to be just, candy canes and unicorns. Push back. That makes life fun. Yeah, I mean, good point, Ryan. I would not be surprised if either Joseph or Will won the championship. They're certainly, they're best of the best. There's so many best of the bests that, I could have chosen many, many to discuss, but rather than run through all the possibilities and who might, let's throw in Ryan Hunter-Reay, coming off a season where it seemed like bad luck was pretty much the only luck that he had. He seems like a guy who's primed for a big old rebound to go and do big things. Simon Pagenaud, right? Could he be at a crossroads? He's had 2 winless seasons out of, 4 at Team Penske. Also has a championship for one of those years. Could this be a big comeback year for him? And again, I'm talking comeback in terms of being in the true championship mix. Someone to watch there, Graham Rahal. There's a more than a handful of drivers you could look at and say, yep, if you don't mention them as a championship contender, you're an idiot. Well, most of you say I'm an idiot anyways, which is great, and I don't disagree. My pick of Scott Dixon, I know that received more than a few groans, like, really, Pruitt, and who are you picking for the Super Bowl, the Patriots and Tom Brady? To which I say, yeah, actually, if you notice my my Friday hamburger and french fry show video, I was wearing my Patriots t-shirt, and so it's actually not a big bandwagon thing. Tom Brady and I are both born in the fine peninsula city of San Mateo, so I've rooted for, I guess, my hometown guy since his first season in the NFL. But anyways, look, I would feel stupid if I chose anyone other than Scott Dixon, 5-time champ. The old proverb of to be the man, you've got to beat the man. And so, I'm Team Dixon in terms of a championship pick. I'd also love to see Katie's pick of Alexander Rossi beat Dixie, because that would be a huge thing. That would be, a full coming of age, full showing and demonstration of championship-worthy talent on his behalf. I'd also say that when he entered the series in, 2016, I didn't see a future champion. I saw a guy, again, young, early in his career, despite the, limited F1 experience. I saw someone who had gobs of talent, who I thought was going to become a race winner. I just did not see the mindset or the on-track behaviors of someone that said, ooh, boy, this guy is going to be fighting for a championship in the next year or two. And guess what? Again, completely wrong. Yeah, but also, I'll couch that by saying, these are things that you hope for, right? All you want to do is to be wrong. Every year, Marco Andretti fits that category. I love the guy. As a person, I got all the time in the world from Marco. The texts we exchange, giving tips on new hip-hop albums or old school stuff, right? Love the guy just on a personal level. Great guy. We also have this annual thing that some of us write about. I've kind of stopped, on, will this be his year? What are the changes he's made to affect his performance, his mindset, his something that will help him to reach maximum potential? I want to see Marco. I think many folks would love to see Marco running in the top 3 and vying for a championship, because I think he has the potential to do it. The talent is there. It's the tapping into it. So I mention that because, for someone like Rossi, who I think is a lot closer to reaching that goal, I might not have thought he had that potential when he first came into the series. He's clearly shown how far he's come, how much he has grown. As I mentioned before, I think even he might be just a little bit surprised at how good he has become so quickly in IndyCar, to the point to where, if you aren't looking at him as one of your top 2 or 3 or 4 championship picks, then you're really wide of the mark. So I want to be, look, I'd love to be correct just to win the bet because I'm petty like that, but if Katie wins, and I do have to go up to Rossi to honor the bet and apologize for not picking him, and buy a nice $100 gift certificate to some sort of fine restaurant for Katie to have a steak. If I have to do those things while celebrating Rossi as our new IndyCar champion, look, that $100 and the apology, that's easy. That forget that stuff. IndyCar has a great gift as a result of an American champion winning an American championship, and I think also signaling if he gets one, I think 2, 3, 4, there are going to be a lot more coming down the road for him. So we all win in that situation. And so coming back to Newgarden and also Will Power, Ryan, it's the same thing. I mean, I've either picked Power or Dixon as my champion for pretty much most of this decade, and I'd love to see DJ Willie P win a championship, add his second title there, because he's just the best. He's so crazy and so fun that, look, man, these are going to be great times. I already love the guy. If the guy never wins another race, he's still just the best. He's an amazing driver, amazing person, hilarious, deceptively smart. He seems like a complete kook in so many things that he says or does, but the deep conversations, I've spent more time with Power talking nothing about racing, but just deep conversations about things you're like, gosh, this guy, he might look like a dim bulb from the outside at times, but that thing is pretty darn bright. And then Newgarden as well. I mean, last year was a little bit weird for him. Finishing 5th in the championship, I would have never predicted that. It certainly would have been 1st, 2nd, 3rd at most. So I think he's going to be primed for a really strong bounce back this year, Ryan. So again, my pick is Dixie. Him winning his 6th, I think that would be an amazing story as well. But yeah, there's something that tells me it's probably too stupid of a concept for me to be trying to pick anyone, because for those of you who already know, I am the worst at making predictions. Even when I feel vaguely confident about this one. Let's get down to our last couple of questions here, and they're going to welcome in our man Charlie Kimball. We're going to go to Joey Bacon from Reddit, who says, do you know how the sponsorship search for Ed Carpenter Racing's number 20 is going? I haven't really enjoyed seeing a blank car for Ed Jones at the past couple of tests. And on that note, Ed Jones is going to miss 4 of the 17 races this year. That's because team owner Ed Carpenter will be in the car for those 4 on the ovals. And he says, so if Ed's in the top 10 in the championship after Detroit, would Ed be willing or financially able to run him in a 3rd car on the ovals to let him have a really good shot and an overall final result? Let's go with the last one. I mean, Ed Carpenter Racing is a business. It is certainly not just something where they love coming out of pocket to put race cars on track. That's the case for just about every team. I would say, though, it's been a little while since ECR has really had its name in the championship frame. That obviously coming back to Joseph Newgarden's time there before moving to Team Penske. If by chance that happens to be Ed Jones, the part-timer there, if that happens to be Ed, once we get through the month of May, I have to admit, I think there's going to be some conversation about whether, some money can be found or invested to make that happen. Just again, knowing how competitive they are, that team is wanting not just to get back into victory lane, but also to remind folks of what it was, what it can be in terms of a true season-long competitor. If Ed happens to be that guy, Joey, I do think this would be a case where, the Ed Carpenter leadership would look for ways to try and fill in the budget to get an extra car on track to keep Ed in motion. As for sponsorship, I will tell you that this is a topic I need to check in on. I try and get as many answers as I can to your questions before we record each week. This isn't one of them, unfortunately, so still need to reach out to the team and find out, hopefully, what they have coming for everything, for all their cars, knowing that Fuzzy's Vodka has moved on as the primary sponsor for the entire ECR effort. We're going to go to DJP from Twitter, who asks, "Hi, any news on the UK TV deal yet?" And I know we've gotten this once or twice before. Did try and get an answer on this, sent a query into IndyCar, and got a note back that they have yet to sign that deal, so there is not really an update to offer. But the series also said that IndyCar CEO Mark Miles and also Steven Starks have several of these deals, international-related TV items, that are nearing completion. So hopefully there'll be some formal news as to what gets signed and where you can watch your 2019 IndyCar. M. Swizzle, Michael Swope on Reddit asks, "Marshall, when was the last time you danced?" And thanks for that. Michael, that coming from the line of People Magazine questions I didn't get a chance to ask at spring training, but I think I might save those for the media day after qualifying for the Indy 500. But since you asked it, Michael, I'll answer it. I think it was yesterday, despite being sick, or maybe even the day before. I forget what it was. My wife had some music playing on a little speaker USB Wi-Fi thingy we have in the kitchen. Whatever it was she was playing, it was kind of funky. And look, you might not know this about me, folks. It doesn't really happen at the track because there are very few reasons for it, but a little bit of dancing in the Pruitt household, it takes place. It really does. All right, let's go to our final question here from me. This comes in from Germany, from Bezel86, another one from the Reddit IndyCar group. It says, "Hi, Marshall, long-time listener. First time I ask a question. I'm a big fan of all motorsports, and especially IndyCar, and I'm also interested in winter sports." It says, "Most winter sports, like, for example, skiing, have a, quote, World Cup each season with races in different disciplines on different locations each week, with the points leader winning the cup in the end, comparable to a racing series. However, in most winter sports, there's also a world championship with all athletes, both men and women, of all the different disciplines coming together for a week or two to the same venue to have one big event with each discipline to crown the world champion. How would you like different disciplines of motorsports like IndyCar, NASCAR, IMSA, NHRA, and so on, coming to the same venue for a week or two, maybe on an oval attached with a road course, and have one big non-championship race each there? Do you think something like that is possible? Maybe with the help of NBC? And then best regards from Germany." I love this idea, and I know this might conjure ideas of IROC back in the day, the old International Race of Champions, which was for the most part a big oval affair, and throwing in champions from IndyCar, sports car racing, you name it, to see how they did pounding around big ovals. Again, not always only ovals, but for the most part. Might even think of Race of Champions, which we have, where there's nothing that they happen to use during those events that is exactly what they use in their natural disciplines, but it gives us a replica, or at least a vague idea of how those drivers would perform. I like this one, though, where, if I'm thinking of, granted, I'm a California kid, but I'm thinking of Sonoma, for example, that has an NHRA grade drag strip that gets used every year by the NHRA and every Wednesday night drags, plus its road course, and possibly you could dip down to Southern California at Fontana, on the big oval there. They also have a drag strip, too, that gets used. I'm not sure if it's NHRA, but I know that it gets used. So I love this idea, though, and of using drivers, I would assume the best drivers, although it'd be kind of funny to grab the worst drivers from IndyCar, NASCAR, etc. But I would actually love to see this different disciplines, clash of champions type thing. And I would say the one proviso would be they cannot, in the competition, drive the thing that they do on a normal basis. So what I would want to see is how, again, pick an IndyCar driver, throw them into a top fuel car, throw them into an IMSA prototype or GT or stock car, something that, again, I'm hoping the selections would be where we don't have someone who spends a lot of time double dipping between IndyCar and IMSA so that they already have essentially two or more of the disciplines mastered. I'd love to see the fish out of water world championships to see how folks adapt with, minimal practice. That might be fun, just out of curiosity, keeping in mind that, this was kind of a normal thing not too long ago, where some of the sport's greatest drivers, our heroes, would dive into just about everything and anything at all times and do pretty amazing things, demonstrating their talent, not just for a little kind of manufactured thing for TV, but actual, hey, never really driven a stock car, but I'm going to Daytona. And, you get Mario Andretti who wins the darn thing. You get named so many of them, Parnelli Jones, Dan Gurney, etc., who were just excellent. And so anyways, I think there's a lot of instances where this might be a blast. I'd love to see it. I don't know how we make it happen, but maybe we just need to keep talking about it and maybe speak the thing into existence. All right, those are all the questions you had from me. Let's get into our man Charlie Kimball, a.k.a. Charlie Murphy, as he was called by Dario Franchitti and Scott Dixon when he was with the Chip Ganassi Racing team. Then we're going to move on to our pal Michael Cannon, race engineer for Dale Coyne Racing, who gets us a lot smarter and brings us inside a lot of the things that we found at Circuit of the Americas, all brought to you by Cooper Tires and our awesome friends at the Justice Brothers. And don't forget to check out TorontoMotorsports.com. Use that special code MPP, that being short for the Marshall Pruitt Podcast, to take, I think it's like another 10% off of the already slashed prices on the 2018 Week in IndyCar t-shirts, Week in Sports Car t-shirts. And then we're going to have some cool new stuff coming with Hamburger and French Fries Show, plus all new t-shirts 2019 with Week in IndyCar, Week in Sports Cars, plus the new Inside the Sports Car Paddock show and logo that still never shown you. So all that stuff is coming, plus the brand new MarshallPruittPodcast.com site, which is a little over a week away from coming to life. All right, off we go with Charlie Murphy. Charlie Kimball, it is always a genuine pleasure to have you on the Week in IndyCar. I should have thought and tried to count the number of appearances, but this has to be at least number 3 or something along those lines. But more importantly, happy birthday to you, brother.
Well, thank you very much, Marshall. It's a pleasure to be able to spend the beginning of my 34th lap around our son together talking about IndyCar racing, because it's something that I do love very much and love talking about. And as you said, I think it's 3 now. It's always a lot of fun. Cool.
Well, as usual, we have great questions that have come in. Tried to structure at least the first few in an order that would open some of the I would say more prevalent items going on in your career. So you will be back with our friends at Carlin Racing in that beautiful Chevy-powered hot rod of yours. Not going to have you full-time, though. And so why don't we start off with a question or two here. First one from Jim Kaiser, and this might open some fun topics. Says, Charlie, are you looking for a full-time ride for the long term? So this short schedule for you this year, I think we can safely assume that if you had control over everything, you'd be locked in for every round. So what's this process like for you of trying to get back to full-time, or not sure what your priority, number one priority might happen to be?
Well, I think one of the things that I got a question on Twitter when we announced that it was going to be a 5-race program with Novo Nordisk back in the Chevy Power 23 for Carlin this year was if this was an adjustment to scheduling because of the birth of our daughter in October, which it's not. I plan to be at every single IndyCar race. I was at COTA for the open test, not just for media day, but for the 2 days of on-track activity as well, because I'm committed to helping Carlin through my experience and my 8 full-time seasons in the IndyCar series, continue to get up to speed and take what we learned last year as a team and grow from that. However I can help build that team, if I'm in the cockpit or out of it, if I'm in the engineering office in a fire suit or in a team polo, if I'm standing on a corner, either on both sides of the catch fencing, my plan and goal is to be there contributing to the team. So yes, I have helmet, will travel, would love to drive anything, anywhere, anytime. And in IndyCar, there are definitely a few races that I'm disappointed that aren't on my schedule at the moment. Races like COTA, after being up in the tower and watching the IndyCars go around such an incredible facility, it looks like a lot of fun to drive. Just as a racer, it looks like fun. And, races like Long Beach and Toronto, where I got the team's first IndyCar top 5 last year. Places like that. Ohio holds fond memories from 2013 and my win there, and Road America with the campgrounds. So yes, I'm still working to try and put other races on the calendar. Carlin and I are working very collaboratively on that and hope that things materialize. But at the same time, I'm going to be there helping the team as much as possible. I've had a couple of people on social media reach out and say, I bought tickets to Austin. I'm flying down there for the race. I was really hoping to get your autograph, but you're not racing. Don't worry. I will be there. I'm always happy to sign autographs for fans, and hopefully I'll have a little more time to chat with them because I won't be rushing off to an engineering meeting or to a session in the car. I might be rushing off to a corner to go time segments and be on the radio to Max and whoever else may be driving for the team, but I will still be there as a part of Carlin, and really proud to represent Novo Nordisk for coming up on our 11th season together with the Race with Insulin program. That's
amazing, and don't be surprised then on those weekends where you might not be in the car if you get a request to come and join us as a guest on a Week in IndyCar live panel for one of the growing number of live events we're just hosting at the track for fans. A similar format, ask questions, have fun, get involved, so that would be a blast. So let's talk a little bit about that, not just the 11th year of you with Novo Nordisk, Charlie, but they have been instrumental in helping you in your career, not only moving it forward, but keeping it at a high level. Obviously, you work very close with them on a personal level in relation to managing your diabetes and such. There's also, as we see in IndyCar and many other sports, certain partners at certain times either step back and say, hey, we need to, downsize our role this year. Might be for 1 year, might be for a couple years, who knows. But knowing that Novo Nordisk has really been the pillar in helping you for so many years, how do you view this upcoming season in terms of looking for new partners? And I don't know if they would be affiliated in the same kind of health-related industry or otherwise, but I know your goal is to be full-time. If you have a primary sponsor and longtime partner who might not be able to fill that role right now, how do you go about filling in those gaps while still maintaining that really positive relationship?
Well, firstly, Novo Nordisk has and will continue to be the cornerstone of my racing program. The Race with Insulin program, being able to talk to people with diabetes, or work within the diabetes sector, if it's physicians, if it's families, if it's patients, if it's nonprofits or legislators, the chance to interact with that group is something that I hold near and dear to my heart, and I joke my semi-functioning pancreas. But at the same time, it is nice to have a cornerstone, a pillar, as you say, of 5 races on the books, including the anchor that is the Indianapolis 500.
Sure.
Being able to grow and talk to potential other partners within the diabetes world and without, being able to showcase a now 10-year, coming into our 11th season successful program, gives them, potential partners, the confidence to get involved, because they know that it can, if it makes sense for them as a business, grow into a long-term relationship that holds value for years and years and years. And that's something that I'm really proud of myself and my personal team in management and marketing, to be able to have such a great partner, to provide them value year after year, to stay involved, give back, and fill that sort of moral cup as well. It is a great relationship, and having that to be able to share with other partners is a great selling point.
So let me ask one last question on this topic. Not knowing how many hours per year you would normally spend working with Novo Nordisk and or pursuing additional sponsors for a full program, you have any thoughts on what your 2019 might be like, knowing that at least today you only have 5 races scheduled? I assume the vast majority of the time not spent at an IndyCar round will be on those business pursuits to, reshape things into more, or if not a straight full-time effort in 2020. But just curious if you think the hours of pursuit and efforts might expand this year more than ever before, or if it might be similar.
Well, I think for that answer, I'm going to draw on one of my father's favorite quotes when, as a farmer and an engineer, that when he owned his own engineering business full time, he said, the really nice thing, Marshall, about owning your own business is you get to pick which 7 days of the week you work. And I think from my side, I've never been afraid of hard work, and I love racing and working within it. So as far as hours, yes, I'm going to try and spend and make sure that I pay attention to the growth and development of my daughter, because she has been an absolute revelation this winter. And this morning on my birthday, walking in to her nursery and her waking up and giving me a 1,000-watt smile may be the best birthday present I've ever gotten. And so that's definitely going to be important for me. But at the same time, I'm going to be working hard away from the track, at the racetrack, building business opportunities for potential partners, making sure to take care of the relationship with Novo Nordisk, making sure to do and successfully do the speaking events that are part of the Race with Insulin program, doing other speaking events for nonprofits, for if it's diabetes nonprofits, youth service organizations. I spent an hour and a half yesterday afternoon at one of the local First Robotics teams. I met them about 5 or 6 years ago and went down. It was their last day to build the robot before they were bagging it for competition, and really enjoyed the tour of their facility. So events like that and time commitments like that aren't going to change. I think I will probably end up being busier this year and still being at the racetrack almost as much, if not more, than I would be if I was driving every round. And I joke that even on weekends off, I find a way to go to the racetrack. If it's when MotoGP was at IMS or the Red Bull Air race at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, I'm always dragging my wife and now my daughter to a racetrack one way or another.
I love it. Well, let's go to our second question. This comes in from our pal Jordan Darwin, who says, Charlie, how did you pick the races for your partial schedule, and what all goes into that process from a driver, team, sponsor, or other concerns?
Well, from a driver standpoint, it is a little less involved as far as choosing races. because that happens at a higher level than me, honestly. And being able to, the only input I had really was I'd love to race in the Indianapolis 500, and I think that provides great value and visibility for a sponsor on the business side. And I think my results at the Speedway help bolster the argument for me to be in the car at that race. But everything else happens at a different level than me. Having said that, the schedule is really nice because I get to bookend the year calendar-wise with St. Pete and Laguna. It's anchored by the 500 and the two other high-speed ovals on the calendar. And it stretches not just throughout the calendar year, but across the U.S. as well.
10-4. Next question, fun one, and I'm certainly expecting you'll enjoy what comes from this relationship. This is via our pal Aaron Walker, who says, with Carlin becoming a partner team with McLaren for the Indy 500, what and any benefits do you see coming from this relationship? I mean, first of all, you should hopefully get a really good discount on Fernando Alonso swag for any of your pals who want some, but what do you think about this, man? I mean, this is it's a pretty cool thing, I believe, from the outside, and I'm definitely confident that although Fernando was super talented on his debut in 2017, your oval record speaks for itself, so at least externally, this looks like it should be a good two-way relationship, but what do you think it might be like once you get into it with the McLaren/Carlin alliance?
Well, firstly, I think the biggest thing is that electric skateboard that Fernando rode around the racetrack a couple of years ago, if I wasn't sure that I would break my neck, wrists, and most of the other of my limbs, I would be asking for one of those as part of this relationship. All kidding aside, though, I think it's going to be a great two-way street. We have recent data with the Universal Aero Kit from last year. We were running consistently in the top 10 before we had a mechanical issue aerodynamically that snuck in the last 60 or 70 laps, and we didn't realize it. So that hamstrung us for the result. But at the same time, we qualified two cars inside the top 20 in our first opportunity. And the engineering staff that McLaren has worked with are people I'm familiar with. Charlie Ping from Pratt & Miller was in our engineering truck last year, shepherding us through that first process, that first 500 month. Andy Brown, I'm very familiar with when he was working at Chip Ganassi Racing when I was driving there. And very storied heritage of success with those two. And McLaren, I think, as a team, will bring some tools that are not as common in IndyCar because of their experience, not only on the road car making side, but their Formula One team as well. And having those tools and that information back and forth between Fernando's car, my car, Max's car, I think it's going to be a really good thing for Carlin. It's going to be a really good thing for McLaren. And frankly, I'm looking forward to, the weather being warm enough to run at the Speedway here in Indiana, but also the opportunity to work with those engineers again and work with Fernando, because I was nothing but impressed with his attitude and character approaching the Indianapolis 500. The respect and the just genuine authenticity he brought to the month of May. It could have gone multiple different ways from a driver with that pedigree, but for him, he came in, did it right, and I was very impressed with that.
The other thing, too, which you touched on, and not asking you to say flowery things about your team just for the sake of it, but I've read a few comments from folks on the good old interwebs saying, Carlin? Well, I mean, why? What? Why would those guys? Why would McLaren do that? Look at Carlin's record last year overall, and my response is, well, rookie team. Trevor Carlin has said, hey, we put our development eggs maybe into the wrong basket, but we know what we need to improve for 2019. And I, at least on last week's Week in IndyCar show with Katie Hargett as my primary guest, mentioned that I expect Carlin to be the big, the IndyCar doesn't have like the NBA's Most Improved Player award, but if it did, I'm confident it's going to go to Carlin. But the take-home message from me, Charlie, maybe you can share some thoughts on this. McLaren isn't signing up, trying to gain access to Carlin's Detroit setups, right, or pick wherever else. They're interested in the Indy 500. You ran well, Max ran well as a rookie team in a year where some cars, went home and were knocked out of the show in qualifying. For what McLaren's after, I think some folks might be forgetting that Carlin actually really impressed as a rookie outfit at the 500.
And I think it runs deeper than that. Those are absolutely valid points. And I agree that we showed very, very well last year. And I think with the time in the off season as a team to catch our breaths collectively and look at what it would take to be better in 2019, they have the skill set to do that. I mean, we've talked about their pedigree ad nauseum in the feeder series, in junior open wheeled cars in Europe. That's the other connection is Farnham and Woking in the UK are not that far apart. The Carlin factory and the McLaren factory, MTC, are not that far apart. And that concept of quote-unquote British teams coming over and competing in the Indy 500, there are a lot of ties with that. And it means that the McLaren crew get to go to Florida in the middle of winter to work on the cars if needed. There, with Carlin ownership and McLaren ownership, there are friendships and ties that are long-lasting, and I think that ability to know who they're getting into business with in racing is valuable on a totally separate level than the competitive and on-track conversations that really prove the point all by themselves, let alone the business aspect.
Let's go to Nick Vance, who first of all thanks you for taking a photo with him last year at St. Pete. He said he'd set out a photo to get as many drivers to sign it as possible of him with his new IMS wings and wheel tattoo. And he said it was way more awkward than I thought about in my head, so thank you for being such a good sport. And Nick's question is, have you ever had an issue with your blood sugar level during a race? And have you ever had to use an insulin pen through your fire suit?
So firstly, I've never had an issue with my blood glucose during races. The preparation I do before I get in the car and the work I put in the off season, in the gym, in the exercise physiology lab, working with my endocrinologist, working with my nutritionist team, to be able to show up at the racetrack and just focus on driving has meant that that's been the case. I've been able to just focus on driving. And as such, I've never needed the orange juice solution that's in my second drink bottle in the cockpit to be able to get glucose as needed. And I've never needed insulin during a live pit stop either.
Well, has that changed at all, Charlie? I shouldn't say changed. Evolved. And I ask that because I remember maybe a year or two into your IndyCar career, I might have asked similar questions. And again, not that you'd said that you'd needed anything during a pit stop or during a race, but just from a physical preparation standpoint, have you gained knowledge and or modified your training regimen throughout the year so that you're able to go to the track now and really have it be an afterthought? I don't know if it was a more prevalent thought early into your IndyCar career than it is today.
I think it's always evolving. I'm always learning. I'm learning about myself as a driver. I'm learning about myself as a brand ambassador. I'm learning about myself as an athlete and my training at Pit Fit Training here in Indianapolis, the work with my exercise physiologist, Dr. Ferguson, who just published a book with a lot of the data that he and I have been developing since my rookie year in 2011. I first went down and went in the lab with him back in 2011 and have been to see him every year, at least once, if not twice, every year since, to get a baseline and understand how my body is, firstly, different as an athlete with type 1 diabetes, but secondly, how my body is developing and changing as I get older. Each year I get older, it changes how I need to train, what I need to focus on, my nutritional requirements. Those are continually evolving. And my diabetes management is a part of that. And so I think I'm really fortunate to have a great trainer in Jim Leo and Alex Bonney, a great team at PitFit that collaborates with Dr. Ferguson to make sure that the work I'm doing, even when it's freezing cold and dark in Indiana, pays off when it's 90 degrees and sunny and you're coming up on the 500th mile of the biggest race in the world.
I just saw, I believe on Instagram, I might be wrong on the social media outlet, but saw Jim post that PitFit's moving into a new, larger facility in the Indy area, and that made me really happy because it told me that he and his company, their company, is succeeding and therefore has a reason to grow and move into something bigger. So I'm hoping, provided I end up coming in for the Indy GP and staying through the end of the 500, I'm actually hoping to spend a little bit of time there, as I am now a couple months into a very long process of trying to be, quote, less of a man. So, look forward.
Well, there will always be the opportunity for you to come work out, Marshall. As I was showing photos of the new sort of unbuilt out space to my wife, she just groaned and said, "Oh, there's so much more square footage for torture."
Nice. Let's go to, well, speaking of your wife, this question comes in from our pal Andrew C., who says, Charlie, you and your wife spend a lot of time outdoors. What's been your favorite outdoor adventure, and what's next on the Kimball family bucket list?
Oh, man, that's so hard. Our national park trip, we drove in the RV with our two dogs from the last race in Sonoma a couple of years ago back to Indianapolis over 3.5 weeks through 8 national parks. And every single one, we checked off a couple of things, if it was hikes or visits, lodges, that sort of thing, and added more than we checked off to each list, because I think the U.S. National Park Service does an incredible job maintaining and protecting the parks from the people from the parks, and the people from each other within those national parks, because they really are one of the greatest resources we as a country have, and they need to be protected. And I will get off my soapbox now and talk about my favorite trips. We loved Glacier National Park. We got snowed out and had to head south to Yellowstone, funnily enough, so we didn't get to spend as much time there as we wanted. But I was getting ready for a hike in the truck or something, and Kathleen saw this massive bull moose walk past. And we saw bear and wolves, standing in Yellowstone, having a picnic dinner on the tailgate of the pickup, watching through binoculars this pack of Yellowstone wolves for an hour and a half until we were so cold we couldn't keep the binoculars from shaking because we were shivering. Was amazing. But being a California kid, I love Yosemite. One of my favorite movies of the last 6 months was Free Solo, about Alex Honnold's free solo climb up El Cap, and seeing it in IMAX was incredible and terrifying all at the same time. So the end of this year, my plans got a little derailed last October when my daughter was born, but I was supposed to be in Yosemite hiking up Half Dome with some buddies. My buddies still went and FaceTimed us from the top of Half Dome as I was holding my brand new baby daughter. So this year I hope to go back to Yosemite, get permits to hike up Half Dome, and camp in the valley right after Laguna.
I love it, man. I love the fact that where we see plenty of social media posts of, I don't know, someone's wrist. Look at this big, shiny $8 zillion piece of metal timepiece, or here I am on a yacht, or here's the overly expensive vehicle, which is going to be worth 20% of what I paid for it here in the coming years. I don't know, man. Sometimes it's just nice to look at your feed and the feed of a few others. Crew members sometimes. I mean, Kara Adams from Firestone as well. She's always doing some really cool things. Sometimes it's just nice to see folks doing, I don't know, let's just say real things. Not, I live a lavish and luxurious lifestyle and I'm going to pummel you with it through social media. So good on you and the family there. Let's see. Kevin Frederico asks a question. I think we've touched on this one in the past, but always glad to revisit these. Kevin asks, Charlie, is there any car that your dad has engineered or designed that you've always wanted to drive? And I'll add to Kevin's question, and if so, what do we need to do to make it happen?
Man, there have been a lot of cars that he's been a part of, the design team, or even parts on the car that he's been a part of the design team, and his credentials and storied past within racing is pretty impressive. And I think it's more impressive how little he talks about it. And unless you draw it out of him, almost painfully so sometimes, it is very, very hard to know everything he's done. But
your dad is one of the awesome conversations to hold or to have in any paddock. Just walking by, whenever I see your dad, I'm like, okay, it's Gordon Kimball time. We're going to talk about cool things.
And so on the list of cars, I think the Yellow Submarine of JR from the 1980 500 would be pretty cool. The Chaparral 2K there. Or is it the Wildcat? I can't remember because he was on the 80 winner for Rutherford and then the 82 winner for Gordon Johncock. And I get those two confused. But the other thing is the late 80s McLaren Hondas that Senna drove to the World Championship. You know, my dad race engineered it, and I thought it would be a really cool close the loop one day if I ever got the opportunity to drive that car. And maybe now with the new relationship with Carlin and McLaren, instead of an electric skateboard from Kamoa and Fernando, I can get the shot to at least sit in. Doesn't even have to run or go on track.
No, we can do better than this. No. Look, we both know Zach. We're going to apply some pressure. I do a lot of fun stuff with Zach with his vintage race cars. I might need to make a little stipulation. All right, I'm not putting one of my cameras in one of your cars till we at least have Chuck driving one of the hot rods that his dad engineered. Because that's pretty cool. We need to make that happen.
And up until the fire a year and a half ago, Marshall, my dad still had all of his Boss McLaren team kit with the red polyester trousers from the late 80s.
I mean, that's just baller right there. That is just, man, I hate to hear that. We got a great fun question. We got 3 to go. This one actually just came in from Paul Ingram, who asks, wanted to ask Charlie what it takes to start an avocado tree. He said, I heard you need 2 to cross-pollinate, and they need to be a certain age to produce. How's your family orchard recovered from the fires as well, which you just mentioned?
So, first and foremost, the ranch is recovering. My sister, as assistant ranch manager, and my dad have been working tirelessly. I made the quip earlier about picking which 7 days of the week you work. And as a farmer, I think you just get to choose which 24 hours of those 7 days a week you get to work. But they are rebuilding and things are coming along. There were a couple thousand trees that went in the ground before it got cold last year. They have, I think, another 10,000 or so to go this year and then some more next year. So they are working hard, and they will take probably 3 to 5 to 7 years to start producing. So one of the things about an avocado is it is a lot slower than an IndyCar. It takes 18 months for the fruit to grow and be ready to be picked. So the fruit that is on the tree or was set in the fall and winter of, say, December of 2018 will get picked in the summer of 2020.
Wow.
So that's one of the reasons why it takes so long for the trees to produce is there are 2 crops on the tree at a time, and it takes a while, not only for the tree to grow big enough to produce fruit, but then the fruit to develop themselves. The other fun fact about most Hass avocados that you get, the variety that you get in the grocery store, I know at Costco you can get Calavo avocados, and if they're California Calavo avocados, there's a chance they will come from either my parents' farm or my grandmother's farm, my uncle's farm. And that avocado, if you take the seed and plant it or put it in water till it seeds and then plant it, it will grow the most incredible strong Hass avocado tree that will never produce a single avocado because the seed comes from the genetics of the root structure where the fruit is from the genetics of the tree that's grafted on top. So it will grow this great tree that you would then have to graft the Hass varietal on top of.
Come for the interaction with IndyCar drivers, leave with knowledge about avocado farming. Hashtag the Week in IndyCar. I absolutely love my listeners, Charlie, because again, if all we did was talk about racing, that'd be a bored life. So hey man, we now know more about avocados. Plus I now know, since my wife and I are fairly regular patrons of either a Safeway or Whole Foods, we now know kind of which brands to steer towards in our avocado purchasing. So that's awesome.
And I love if people just buy avocados, a rising tide raises all boats, and so the more demand for avocados in the market, the better it is for all avocado farmers.
All right, our penultimate question, my friend. This comes in from Don Davis on the topic that just landed in most people's minds yesterday. It says, Charlie, let's say you're racing in the rain and trailing another car. Won't the new advanced frontal protection device create a blind spot and prevent you from seeing the rain lights?
So one of the things, I saw that question come through on social media and have been thinking about the response because one of the things that IndyCar has done behind the scenes and done very, very well is research. They researched the aero screen to the nth degree, and it was in those last few tests that they found they're going to have to reevaluate that process. The halo, applying a halo to an IndyCar, it's not just as simple as bolting a piece on because it comes down to loads and load distribution. And the way the current Dallara chassis is built and the hard points and the load distributions between bulkheads and everything else means that it is actually more dangerous in an incident with a halo than without because of how the car is built.
Yeah, and to your point here, and to add a little bit more to this, Don, if you look at every Formula One car, for example, that has a halo, since those were introduced last year, each one of those chassis was designed from the very first lines drawn in CAD to accept loads fed through the halo's contact points and specifically created to integrate any loads it might receive into the chassis in a manner that they could be received without destroying the chassis. With the current DW12, which has been around since 2011 and in competition since 2012, it was never designed for such things. So while we could bolt a halo onto the car, there's nothing about the DW12's design where those points, the mounting points, would actually be attached to the chassis, where that chassis is then meant to receive those loads and do anything more than buckle or shear those parts of the car away. So, as Charlie's mentioning, to incorporate a halo, it would have to be a ground-up, brand-new, integrated from day one design, which is why you can't just simply ring up, quote, F1 and say, hi, could you send us 50 halos? We're going to go to Ace Hardware, get some nuts and bolts and some drills, and slap some on for St. Petersburg.
And the other thing is they put a halo device on simulators, both the Dallara simulator as well as constructor simulators, and had multiple different drivers run them to make sure that that center post wouldn't create a visual disruption. And Don's question about the rain light in the rain, honestly, unless you're very close and going very slowly, if there is a significant amount of water like we had in Barber last year, the rain lights are hard to see anyways. Not because of any frontal protection device, but simply because the amount of spray and the volume of water that gets lifted off of the racetrack because of the aerodynamics underneath the car and the wings on the top of the car, as well as the volume of water that the Firestone Firehawk rain tires move, is more than any disruption visually. Having said that, that vertical shark fin, I mean, if you put your hand in front of your face vertically and look beyond it, it doesn't disrupt your field of view, because the beautiful thing about being predators and having two eyes mounted on the front of your head instead of the side of your head means that you get to adjust your focus point past it and look for the rain light.
Just a couple other things, too, to add in here. I reached out to our friends at Bell Racing Helmets USA there in Speedway, Indianapolis, and said, hey, what's the width of the average size IndyCar driver's helmet? And they said it's 10 inches. And so if you think about the width of this protection device, it's 3/4 of an inch wide. Helmet is 10 inches wide. So if we're just talking about, to your point, Charlie, of, kind of putting your hand vertically in front of your face, it doesn't take up a huge cross-section of what's in front of one's eyes. The other thing I'll mention, too, and we'll have to see how it works in practice, but often when you have a blade-like device like this mounted in this general area of the chassis, it can also help to divert air a wee bit from the driver's helmet. So I'm not claiming that will be the case with the AFP, but just saying that, there it could have an effect in the rain of actually creating a little bit of less direct rainfall on a driver's helmet. Not saying by any vast percentage, but it might actually not be that bad of a thing altogether. So
Absolutely. Last question, Marshall, you were saying?
Yep. Easiest one, but hopefully the most fun for us to close here on the Charlie Kimball edition of the Week in IndyCar, presented by Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers, comes in from Josette Torres, who says, how's Charlie Kimball adapting to #dad life?
It is the single best, single most challenging, single most rewarding thing I've ever done outside of qualifying for the Indy 500, and most days ahead of that. I told the story about walking in and getting a smile from my daughter this morning, and I went to swimming class with her to get her used to being in the pool on Monday, and when she laughs and watching her realize that she had hands and what she could do with those hands, and you just see this thing that is a combination of my wife and my genetics, and watch her grow and develop and learn is so much fun. And for the first time in my life, my humor isn't just dad jokes, because now I'm a dad. They're just jokes, and that's the best thing about it.
Oh, Lord. Well, you do have a specific talent in that area, so we are going to pray for your daughter and hope that that side of the Kimball rearing process does not have a lasting impact. Thanks again, my friend, for taking some time on your birthday. You are always very gracious with your time, but also for me, and I know for many of my listeners, a favorite guest, because you can not only speak about the driving side, Charlie, but the business side, the engineering and technical side. You definitely bring the full package here. So thanks for stepping in and taking some time for us here, my man, and hopefully the rest of your birthday is fairly awesome.
Well, I appreciate that, Marshall. And a couple of last thoughts for you and your listeners. Firstly, a very happy birthday to the captain, Roger Penske. He and I share a birthday. although I think he was born a couple of years before me.
One
so
or
it's
two.
his birthday that I was born on. And for those of your listeners that are on social media, even if you're not, check out the Instagram post from today of Robert Wickens standing up and giving his fiancée a hug, because I think that really was one of the greater birthday presents that I've seen or ever had, because it's been 6 months since his accident, and darn if he's not blowing the doctor's timelines out of the water, as any athlete is prone to do. But he's not far from our thoughts, and appreciate the work he's doing and the progress he's making.
Amen to that. Charlie Kimball, look forward to seeing you in St. Pete, and thanks again, my friend.
We'll see you at the racetrack. Thanks, Marshall.
Michael Cannon, welcome to the Week in IndyCar. It's been a little while since you've been on the show. I'm trying to think, was it maybe Indy back in 2017? I'm not sure when, but it feels like it's been a little while.
It has been a little bit of time. I thought I poisoned the pool. I thought I'd never get another invite.
Well, after we got through all the restraining orders and whatnot, we were able to clear that away. So great to have you back. As I mentioned to you before we started recording, I'm just a happy guy here, because normally on weeks where we have an IndyCar driver guest and then either an engineer, team principal, or similar, it's always a pretty heavy ratio of questions slanted towards the driver, because, in general, they're the most well-known of what we do. I was really happy to see this week that with you and Charlie Kimball, I think you have just as many questions as Charlie, if not more, which tells me nothing negative against Charlie, just that folks are really wanting to learn some more, get smarter with the help of one of the best IndyCar engineers in the paddock. Also, the person who I readily credit as my race engineering mentor back in the day when I was trying to be less useless, and you took pity on me. So, how wonderful.
Well, one, you're very kind, and two, obviously, I have a great deal of relatives out there that subscribe to Racer.com.
Well, fair enough. All right, owing to the fact that we do have a lot of questions, and you have work to do trying to help Dale Coyne Racing win this year with your driver Santino Ferrucci, and also overall with the awesome Sebastien Bourdais, the French fry to my hamburger, why don't we go ahead and get rolling here? Some of these questions we received, I know, a couple of them were from me, but I figure we'll roll some of them into our conversation, because you would be the voice of greater expertise. First one comes in via Reddit, Hitaroki2, who says, "Hi guys, I know one thing that was being worked on during the COTA test was the tire compound." He says, "I know some drivers were saying that the tire was falling off quickly, and even though this may create some great racing, I would guess they don't want the tires to fall off too quickly." And he asks, "Do you think Firestone will bring in something new for the COTA race, and how do you think the, quote, Reds will do?" And also curious if we think the Reds might cut 1 to 1.5 seconds off lap times. Why don't we start with tire hardness versus available circuit grip, because that was a conversation you and I had there, which was, sure, we'd certainly love if Firestone could soften up their primary tires here. I don't know, Michael, though, if I would say that's because Firestone showed up with the wrong tire compared to, boy, that track is just not even 10 years old, but that track surface really doesn't give much in the way of grip, complicating things for, anything other than the softest tire.
Right, yeah. Well, the important thing to know about Firestone is, they're fundamentally quite conservative in the first year. They'll go there with a tire that they're confident that will be suitable and at the same time won't be the topic of the race. The race, the topic of the race should be the racing. So the tire might not be, idealized for that track, but they'll take what they've learned from this year, and in 2020 you might see a tire that is it's quicker, it's better suited for the track, but Firestone will take a conservative approach. As far as the Reds go, it's going to be interesting, because let's remember, we got 20 corners in a 3.4 mile track. Elkhart Lake's 4 miles long. It's got 14 turns. You pick up a tenth at every one of these corners. the reds are going to make a huge difference. Come the race, what's the durability going to be? That's anybody's guess.
Coming back to the track surface, Michael, that's something where you and all the other race engineers and drivers during a track walk, it's really something that isn't just about, hey, all right, this corner goes left, and hey, someone write that down. This one goes right. I mean, you guys know the circuit layout. It's more a case of walking the track to kneel down, dig your finger or thumbnail into the surface, just look and get a feel for the quality of surface condition, and also how that fluctuates throughout a circuit. What did you find just on that initial track walk that gave insights as to what the COTA layout might offer, trying to hold on to those Firestones as they roll over?
Oh, I mean, it's going to be tricky because the type of aggregate they used, in general, just seems very sort of weather-worn. There are some tracks you go to. If you go to a racetrack in Florida, you'll see there's a lot of seashells in the aggregate, right? And seashells are usually broken up and they're pretty sharp. The aggregate they used at COTA is sort of very weather worn. It's seen a lot of rain, a lot of sand, a lot of wind. So all the rocks and the stones and the pebbles that make up the aggregate are very rounded, and so it makes for a very polished, very slick track. So you look at it and you think, this is a magnificently fast track. It's got huge grip, big arrow sections, really holding the car to the ground. But the fact of the matter is the track is quite slippery.
Another thing, too, just trying to add a little bit to the tire versus circuit dynamic at COTA, owing to those 20 corners, Michael, and the fact that the tires are being asked to produce, I don't know, I guess I would say more of the grip than we might have expected, right? It's kind of like Velcro. I think of tire and track surface like Velcro, and in a perfect world, the circuit is super grippy and is really the doing most of the work in that Velcro relationship, and the tires then are not having to be the ones that are working super hard to generate that grip. And when that nice dynamic happens, since the track is shouldering most of the, call it, grip responsibility, you get tires that last, a really long time. You invert that, though, kind of like what we saw at COTA, and folks are talking about, I got about a lap and a half, maybe 2 of peak tire performance on the Firestone primaries before they fell off, and those comments were being couched with, and it's not necessarily because the quote tires are bad or there's something wrong with the tire. It's they're being asked to shoulder so much of the grip responsibility due to that lack of surface grip from the track. You're just depleting your grip resources far faster than anyone anticipated. So I know that's going to be, when we go back for the race, it's certainly going to be a big thing folks are trying to manage.
Oh, no, absolutely. And, I mean, Firestone's task at that place, you've got to remember, I think there's, 7 turns there. They're basically 60 mile an hour. So, those aren't necessarily aero-driven corners. I mean, that's mechanical grip. So, we're expecting Firestone to have this wonderful tire that has all this great grip in these low-speed corners, but at the same time is durable enough to deal with the high-speed sections as well. And so it's a very fine line that Firestone has to walk. And as I say, they're going to do the conservative thing because they don't want the topic of race weekend to be the tire.
Let's go to Gabe Argenta, who has a couple of questions, general questions for you. And I think Gabe might be someone trying to learn more, hopefully, in engineering their own vehicle. Gabe says, Michael, what's the top priority for car setup when coming to a track for the first time? Is it gearing, ride height, alignment? And then asks a couple more questions I will add in after. But when you're heading to a track first time, what's your mindset in terms of I have to nail this thing first from a domino effect, and then that'll kind of set how I work with the rest of the items?
Yeah, to answer Gabe's question, really, it's yes to all. We do have the benefit of being able to simulate our car around the track, right? So, a lot of settings can be roughed in well in advance. I'll give you an example. We did the sim work for Laguna, and we missed the front ride height by 40 thou and the rear by 80 thou, which is pretty impressive given the topography of the track. Ultimately, setting up the car is iterative. We rough the thing in using our simulator, our simulations. We run the car, listen to the driver, review the data, and then adjust accordingly. And there are times when you're doing fairly small adjustments. There's other times when you're doing fairly large adjustments. And maybe, if you're going to do a geometry change, we're going to change the rear geometry, then we'll actually stop and address the gearing at the same time. But given the competitiveness, everything's a priority.
Gabe also asks Mike about whether there's a single biggest parameter from an engineering standpoint that influences lap times. And that's one of those, for me, as a former bad race engineer, kind of the how long is a piece of rope question, where you go, well, I could answer this 1,000 different ways, but curious if there's one thing that jumps out to you as the single biggest influencer of lap time.
Oh, sure. I think that, especially in road racing, trim, where there's no question about it, the king is downforce. It really does dictate the entire car setup. Our car's basic setup is managing the downforce and how the front to rear migration works as it, accelerates, brakes, turns, etc. So, we address that as best we can, and then after that, we try and make grip with the spring that we've come up with. But, downforce is free speed.
Last one here. Gabe asks, what do you spend the most time dialing in at a racetrack with the cars you're engineering? And what I love about that is each engineer, I think as Gabe understands, has their own thing, right? There are some who are just hyper about tire pressures and trying to perfect that. Others, they are hawks for ride height. I mean, every engineer, some they're just live nothing but damping. Curious if you have a Michael Cannon area where you're like, okay, that's my thing that I really am always trying to be on top of, that either makes the most sense to you or you feel that you can influence the most.
Well, again, it sort of circles back to springing, right? As fundamental as this may seem, springs, we're always working this fine line between controlling the aero, which means the stiffer the car is, the easier it is to control the migrations, right? But then you need to have grip. And if you want to get grip, then softer springing is better. You're going to get grip. You're going to get mechanical traction out of that. So, that's the tightrope we walk. And so, once you've determined where you think you need to be with springing, then from there on it's, adjusting geometries to get the car to do what you want to do, correcting the damping for what the spring split is, influencing it with the differential and other alignment settings. But yeah, springing's a big thing.
I have to credit you. I think it was maybe the Cleveland Indy Lights weekend, or IndyCar / Indy Lights weekend in '96, where you had asked me to set the pressures on Mark Hotchkiss's car. And for whatever reason, maybe I just had a whole bunch of Mountain Dew. I think I had like 7 pretty darn good tire pressure questions for you and rattled them off. And what about this? And why that? And what about this thing? And shouldn't we do that? And you did your best to answer them. And then I felt good because I learned more because I had thoughts of my own and questions that were worthy of receiving answers. And then I think you kind of capped it off with a very nice, and if you can now please go do the thing I asked you to do. And just
very nice.
Yeah. And, and I'm not saying that in a critical way. That's part of the deal, right? You with Trevor Green-Smith, who we affectionately refer to as T-Max, your assistant engineer, great kid, et cetera, but it's not exactly warms and hugs all the time. There's a little bit of, having to rough them up a little bit, make sure that there's, if you're going to pass on information, you got to earn it, so take the lumps with it. So anyways, I just remember from that particular incident at Cleveland, I was like, okay, even though I was just essentially told, great questions, here's some of the quick answers I can give you to satisfy whatever is ruminating in your brain, and please just shut up and do the thing I asked you to do.
And if you don't mind, we need to stop and actually knock out the rant.
Yes. Tires and tire pressures and just tire management really, whatever reason, took root for me then, just from an engineering standpoint, as something I carried forward as not saying that I'm any better than anyone else, but just it was a thing where for me, while in race engineering, like, ooh, okay, let me see if I can become a tire whisperer, because now I understand more. So let's see. Let's go to Ben.
As my tire guy refers to himself, he's the rabbi of rubber.
Oh, jeez. Compared to some of the places you and I might have gone to in the Castro district back in the day, and we're going to leave that one right there. We're going to go to...
And next.
Yes, and next question, boys and girls. So this one comes in from Ben Cohen. Thanks, Ben. You're always sending in great stuff for us. This question's for the two of us. He calls you Mr. Cannon, by the way, if only he knew. You aren't deserving of such accolades. Are teams worried at all about how the new frontal protection device may impact aero and increase costs to teams? Maybe I spoke on this a little bit in my little cold open before we had you on, Mike, but let's talk a little bit about this advanced frontal protection device. I don't know if it was something that every team and every engineer expected or knew was coming. Some did. Some that I've spoken with knew kind of where things were headed, and the windscreen was not going to be on the front burner. But how is this being received, at least from your end? Positive, negative, neutral? What do you think?
Well, I mean, to answer Ben's question directly, I mean, any change costs the team money, right? I mean, if you give me two rocks, I'll probably test them in every way possible until I find one that's better than the other. But, we'd heard rumblings that the series was going to do something along these lines. We weren't 100% sure what they were going to do. But, is it inconvenient as far as the timing? Maybe. But realistically, anything that potentially makes the cars safer for the drivers, you don't squawk about. Be like, okay, that's good. We've made a step. This isn't going to be the final step, but we've made a step, and we'll work around it.
From what
at the end of the day, we're happy to take on the additional workload if it makes it safer for the guys.
And from what I understand, I mean, cost-wise, I've heard something in the $5,000 range for everything, because obviously this isn't just the device itself, but there's also prep work that's going to need to be done to the tub, and the addition of additional material atop the tub to carry it and such, and integrate it into the chassis. So it's not an insignificant cost. It's not crazy, but we have to keep in mind that every vehicle that rocks up for the April 24 open test, and then every vehicle competing in the Indianapolis 500 is going to need to have one in place. And then when we leave Indy, every chassis contesting Detroit and otherwise. So it means we're not just sending in the super speedway tubs. We're having to essentially outfit any chassis that a team plans on using from Indianapolis forward. So it's again, this is, I think, of the most critical areas that I've heard from folks over the last day. It's not on the safety side. It's not questioning whether the device will hopefully help in some way, but it's this is late notice on February 19th, with the first race coming up on March 10th. We then have a busy March, a busy April, busy May, having, cars get stripped down between rounds as it is, but having to send off a lot of tubs to have this work done, get them back. I mean, this is I think there's some folks who are really wishing that this announcement, that this bulletin came out on January 19th, because...
Sure. But at the same time, I mean, you have to look at it from the standpoint of somebody comes up with this concept, right, and then they need to test it, and they need to proof it. Then they actually have to manufacture these parts, once they've decided, okay, this is a good idea, and this is what we need to do to the chassis to make sure that the loads are acceptable and this thing does what it's meant to do. All of that takes time. It's all very iterative. And, is it later than we'd like? Sure, absolutely. But at the end of the day, if it makes it safer, then you go, okay, fine, we'll do what we have to do.
Go to Michael Goodyear, who says, for Mr. Cannon, can you speak about your time with the Players Forsyth team, and especially about the latter half of the 2006 Champ Car season when you had the opportunity to work and win with a pre-NASCAR A.J. Allmendinger? He says,
the Dinger!
I know. He says, I've always wondered what A.J.'s career would have looked like if he had stayed in open-wheel racing. I know it wasn't the best of times for IndyCar and Champ Car back then, but AJ certainly displayed immense talent for those races he did with the Players Forsyth team, and it was so much fun to watch. So I happened to be there for a couple of those races and even embedded with the team a little bit back when I was starting my little reporting journalism career. And, man, you two, there was a magic chemistry there.
Oh, no, it's funny because it started this way. On the Tuesday prior to Portland, Neil McElwright, who was the head of Players Forsyth, said, look, we're going to put A.J. Allmendinger in your car starting this race forward. And I was like, oh, okay. And we had done a test at Portland about 2 weeks beforehand, and Mario Dominguez was driving the car. And Mario's very underrated. He's very good at setting up a race car. And I'd been to Portland many times, but never really sort of had the key to Portland, never really got my brain around it for whatever reason. I mean, if you take me to Cleveland, I can tell you exactly what we need to do. But Portland was a little bit of a mystery, and we actually made some progress. So AJ shows up on Thursday, and I'm apologizing for the car. Like, this isn't the best track to be joining us at. And he went out and did the first practice and went, that actually feels pretty good. And I was like, all right. And then off he went. And lo and behold, he won the race. And fortunately, the next weekend was Cleveland, which we actually knew. And if you remember, he qualified in pole and went off on the first lap and wound up last and drove all the way back to the front and won the race there. So, pretty exciting stuff with the Dinger. But the funny thing was I started my career with AJ apologizing for this dumpster fire that I was about to give him to drive at Portland.
And this is one of those great theoreticals that I think about from time to time, and Michael has asked here, what do you think if AJ had said no to the draw of NASCAR and decided to stay in open wheel, even with the upcoming merger in 2008 and whatnot? You think we'd be talking about at least a one-time, if not a multiple-time champion if he'd been able to stay with a good team?
It's always hard to say, right? I mean, the level of competition and the level of parity in this series nowadays makes it really hard to sort of make a statement like that. I mean, you think about how many terrific teams, how many remarkably good drivers are out there. It's hard to say, but he definitely would have featured, Marshall.
Well, I think he had the talent, without a doubt, to become a champion. But as we've seen, there's some folks who've never done so, or some folks who've done it once and were unable to find that magic formula again. So talent-wise, to me, never been a question, Michael. There was certainly had the ability to just win and win and win. But, putting it all together, that's always, till they've done it, we're just kind of speculating. Let's go to the next one from Marty Davis, and he sent this in for me, but I wanted to throw this one your way. It says, being that IndyCar is primarily a stock series, what, besides dampers, are open for teams to develop? We've written about these things before and spoken about them. A variety of items are kind of team-based development. Hey, if you want to make this smaller piece or that smaller piece, engine ancillaries or otherwise, IndyCar's open that up. But maybe, Michael, you could speak on the, I guess, the competition side that's been opened up. I mean, I know anti-roll bars were really something that folks were so happy to have opened up. Not complete freedom, but what areas on the engineering and I guess performance development side can you play with beyond dampers?
I mean, pretty much everything, right? I mean, I think I use the analogy: if you give me two rocks, I can probably figure out which rock is better. We spend an awful lot of time doing fixture and rig testing on parts. There are coatings and processes that we're allowed to do to parts. You know, we've gone from designing new and improved and lighter and stronger or whatever bits to basically analyzing the various parts that we're allowed to use. So, our focus has definitely changed, but we're still just as busy as ever, investing our time in trying to quantify how one piece is better than another.
But in terms of the actual components on the car, I mean, IndyCar has not given teams just carte blanche to make any and everything that is desired. I mean, there are specific areas of, within the suspension, for example, that you are allowed to develop on your own. So I think that might have been the heart of the question that we received.
Yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time reducing parasitic losses, friction losses in systems, lightening up. Some of the stuff is actually open for development hardware, for example. So, we might look at what we're doing with something as simple as hardware and making a part that is lighter. Anytime we can make something lighter, it's going to be beneficial to us. We can lower the CG of the car, we can lower the mass of the car, ballast it down lower, and that in turn makes it faster. So, we're definitely in there with a microscope these days.
Let's go to Chris Hoffman. Again, this one came in for me, but I'm going to throw it your way because you can speak to it more gooder. Chris says, what is a driver in the loop simulator, and how does it differ from a non-driver in the loop simulator? So a bit of a fun one, since it's something where you're actively engaged more in one than the other, but definitely in both.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a variety of simulations available, and there's even varying degrees of simulation. We have, the ability to make a mathematical model of the car and shove it around the track on a laptop and get sort of the fundamentals. We don't have a good sort of metric for feedback from the driver. The other one is you can go to a proper driver in the loop simulator. Dallara has one, Honda, Chevrolet has one. You go in there, again, build your mathematical model in the car, and then there's feedback, not only data-wise, but also from the driver. It's very much an iterative process because you want to go and test various items and then sort of get the same feedback from the simulator as you do on track from the car. So, it can be very, very complicated, and you have to understand your limitations as a group. So you want to simulate at a certain level. You don't want to overreach. If you try and get too complicated with too small a group, then you're not going to get any results whatsoever. So you need to go in understanding your own limitations and then accepting, the level of fidelity that you get back from either simulator.
So in very just simple visual terms, Chris, we have the driver in the loop simulator, and that is the driver sitting in a simulated cockpit, usually with multiple display panels in front of them, a multi-axis rig that you tend to see, and that is something where you will have, obviously, the driver strapped in, but you also have race engineer and those who are running the simulator feeding in a variety of changes for them to feel and hopefully weigh in on. Then you have the standard, I guess I would say, computer-based simulation, something that does not have a driver in the loop, that is just using software. Call it that simulation software is trying to simulate changes in a more just PC computing type environment. So between the two, obviously getting access to a full DIL, driver in the loop system, that's a big thing. That's taking scheduling in advance. Could be done with a manufacturer, Chevy or Honda. Could be done at Dallara, but those are certainly things where throwing a Bourdais or a Ferrucci or whomever onto one every day of the week, I'm sure you'd do it if you could, Mike, but that currently isn't in the Dale Coyne Racing arsenal of in-shop toys to play with. But on the other hand, simulation, actual, again, PC-based computing, that is something where you and your assistant engineers, I know, are constantly running through ideas, trying to see if something will work, and or, as you mentioned earlier, trying to rough in what you think might be the best starting point to test in a new track like COTA.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I mean, we use it. We use it like any other tool. I mean, we know that you can't undo bolts with hammers. So I mean, we use the simulation appropriately. I mean, we use it to get ride heights, gaps to thirds, basic ride heights, front wing angles, etc. And then we can also build alternative setups, and it gives us we can figure out the mechanical balance of the car and influence the car that way. We can do downforce over drag studies for some of the circuits that require trimming, say Elkhart or Indy Road Circuit. But it's like any other tool. I mean, you've got to know how to use it, and you've got to understand the limitations. Our biggest challenge, and any team's biggest challenge, is the tire. Modeling the tire properly. If you can't model the tire properly, then you got to understand that you're sort of simulating it at a Fisher-Price level.
I love it. Next one comes in from Vincent Anderson, who asks, Mr. Cannon, when chassis makers are designing a car, do they often have an average driver size in mind? Or what do they do in terms of trying to maybe set minimums and maximums so that a shorter driver isn't lost in the cockpit, or a tall driver isn't too cramped or sticking out too far? Just curious if you can offer any insights from that perspective.
That's probably best asked of somebody like Alex Timmermans over at Dallara, but my understanding was when they parameterized the DW12, it was based around the maximum, which is, or was at the time, Justin Wilson. And, you've got Justin, you've got Graham Rahal, both are pretty good sized guys. So I think they sort of decide, okay, if we get a 6'5" guy in here comfortably, then anybody else should fit.
And on the flip side, you've got Takuma with a bit of a booster seat, but that just means that while, kidding aside, while making their seat, that can be, the thickness of that can certainly be modified or, done what's necessary to have someone sit a little more upright or just boost them upwards. Might not be perfect from a center of gravity standpoint, but, there's only so much you can do to try and create parity in a series where, when you have a Graham standing next to his teammate Taku, life did not create parity there, so you do your best, but you also accept, there are going to be some compromises. Next one here is, I think this is a wonderful trip down memory lane, courtesy of Brian Alexander. It says, for Michael, when you worked with Thomas Knapp and Super V's, who are some of your drivers? He says he remembers you guys working out of some of Dave Conti's shop in Pittsboro, Indiana. Anytime we can mention Conti, that's a darn good day.
It is. Dave is one of the finer people in motor racing. I mean, he's everything that's good, wonderful, and enjoyable about motor racing.
And Linda as well.
In those days, back in those days, obviously ran Tom Knapp in Super V and Atlantic in Sports 2000. Cousin Steve, of course. Paul Radisich in 1988. There's a list of of seriously suspect people that I could go through. But worked with quite a few drivers over those years.
I'm certainly the Radisich one in particular. Boy, that guy seemed like he had the goods at least to play with IndyCar drivers at the time. One of New Zealand's finest.
Good. Yeah. One of the most sensitive guys that I've ever met, as far as driving a race car. I remember when we were at Meadowlands, and he wanted the seat adjusted, and he took the front page of the newspaper and folded it in half and put it behind his back. We go out for the first practice session. He comes in that one lap, and he comes and he flips up in the visor and goes, "Mike, yeah, so tear that thing in half, please." You got to be kidding me!
Wow.
But I can remember also being at a race, and he goes, we were going through the changes on the car, and he goes, "Oh, by the way, you need to look at the right rear. I think there's a rod end that's sort of getting a little bit sloppy." And I'll be darned if he wasn't right. I mean, this thing had maybe 20,000 play in it, but he could feel it. Yeah, it was pretty impressive.
I don't understand. I've never understood human beings like that, and it's just because, at least in my limited driving career, I was so numb and dumb that, anytime I've worked with a driver who can feel those things, I'm like, what is wrong with you? You're just not right.
Yeah, how they can detach themselves. Yep.
Don't understand it. Let's see. We got one here from Andy Burns. Just more of an opinion thing. Andy asks, are closed IndyCar cockpits inevitable? What do you think, Mr. Cannon? You and I have spent our lives, by and large, in open-wheel racing, me with some sports cars in there too, but we've spent big chunks of our lives, you growing up with your dad, where open cockpit, that's just a way of life. I don't know, man. Do you think it's inevitable we'll head towards closed cockpits on open-wheel cars, or maybe not?
I don't know, but never say never. Without having a crystal ball, it's hard to say, but let's be realistic. If you have a roof over your head, it's probably a safer situation. I'm a purist. I'd like to see them open cockpit. At the same time, I'm fully aware of the dangers involved.
And I can mention that, the things that come to mind. Here's, Andy, a few things that I've noticed in recent years. Not saying any of this is accurate or holds any value, but when I look at sports car racing and prototypes, for example, where it was just, not too many years ago where there were still open-top prototypes, that has now changed completely. We obviously have had GT cars that have been closed-top for the most part forever, and at least in one of the things I've noticed in IMSA and the WEC, phenomenal, amazing vehicles, some of them rocket fast, peak of technology, just all kinds of great, great things, and with some amazing drivers inside of them. I can tell you, though, that since we've moved towards everything being closed cockpit, it's become harder for me to appreciate the standout driver performances, knowing that, with the anti-reflective stuff and this and that on windscreens and you name it, they're almost these, somewhat anonymous vehicles performing on track. I might know the driver rosters inside of them, Michael, but again, you look at the stopwatch, everybody's pretty much as good as everybody, and in only in rare occasions do we see something where, whoa, that person on the stopwatch is doing something incredible. Just that evocative, a driver's head, leaned one way or the other, or you see, their hands atop the steering wheel crossed up a little bit, doing things where you get the visual inputs of a human being just doing amazing things, trying to control a beast beneath them. I can say for sure it's become harder to appreciate that with sports that have gone from being open cockpit to being closed off, just because you kind of can't see the operators doing their things. I think of placing some sort of cloaking something, or a big black tarp over the best quarterbacks or hitters or shooters and, stick and ball sports. And, you might see the ball fly out of, the ball start to fly in whatever direction, but if you can't see what the person's doing to make that thing happen, to me at least, there's a little bit of disconnectedness that takes away from the sport. So,
I completely agree. That's why I say, the purist in me wants to see that human part of it. It definitely humanizes it when it's an open cockpit. As soon as you put a roof on, all of a sudden it becomes a bit of an appliance, doesn't it? At the same time, I mean, we've always got to be aware that, what these guys doing is horribly risky, and anything we can do to mitigate that risk is worth doing.
So I would say, Andy, I won't be surprised if in my lifetime IndyCars become closed cockpit. I just hope that the ability for folks to connect with the drivers and what they do and to appreciate how special it is maintained in some capacity. I don't know how, but that's a hope at least. Getting down to the last couple of questions here, Michael. We've got one it was certainly floating around the paddock at COTA. Rafael Placha asks, or says, back in the day, he was listening to some Formula One broadcasters say, back in the day, when some of the smaller teams in F1 that didn't have the resources would run out of regulation during testing, preseason testing, maybe way below the minimum weight or similar, to try and catch the eyes of potential sponsors, trying to make a big splash during preseason, not necessarily conforming to the intended regulations to get the spotlight. And he said that came to mind coming out of COTA, and asks if there's any chance of that in this day and age, that maybe Harding was doing something, quote, out of regulation to lead some of those sessions. So wouldn't ask you to comment on the Harding team in particular, but just curious, Michael, from a IndyCar technical inspection standpoint, right? I mean, I saw constantly throughout both days, before the first session, between sessions, after, there are a lot of cars getting thrown across IndyCar's tech pad, where they're weighed and just all kinds of things. Do you think a team, if they wanted to try and play this game of running, below weight or whatever else, to capture those headlines, to attract sponsors, you think that might even be possible with how IndyCar regulates?
Well, for the open tests, I mean, you don't actually have to be, you don't have to adhere to the rules, right? If the car is underweight, it's underweight. That makes no difference. I mean, you're not actually competing. At the open test, they do tech basically as a courtesy, right? So you can go in there and check your car, and if there's anything that's out of spec, you can address it. Was Harding running at their legal weight? We have no way of knowing until we go to the first race and see how they do. For us personally, we run the cars as they're meant to be run at the racetrack. So we'll run on weight. We'll run with everything in a legal position, etc. Because there's no point in tuning around a car that isn't going to be legal to race.
Martin Henderson has an interesting question here. It says, Mike, what's the difference between getting to know, say, a rookie driver and learning to work with a rookie driver versus onboarding a veteran driver? And I know for you, you've been in both situations where you've got a pup like Santino, who was, very impressive at Laguna and at COTA. Last year as well on his debut, or in the little bit of racing that he did. But, I think he showed quite well. But you've also had the opportunity to work with some veterans. What's it like for you? In theory, some come in with maybe more of a preconceived way to achieve what they want, and maybe the rookies are a little more open, or how does that work?
It's kind of a tricky question because, you think of Santino being a 20-year-old rookie, but at the end of the day, this is a very seasoned race car driver. He really knows what's going on. The guy's been racing since he was in diapers, right? So, this isn't some pup that just shows up with his head in the clouds. It's like, well, golly gee willikers, this is really fun. I'm going to drive fast like a rabbit. He has a good appreciation of how a race car works. My job is to sort of indoctrinate him, if you will, into the setup of an Indy car. but his basic fundamental racing skills and driving skills already exist. So it makes my job a little bit easier. With somebody like, say, Sebastian Bourdais or when I was running Tony Kanaan, for example, they definitely have a data bank of things that they know and are aware of, and you don't have to warn them of certain things. They also have a good idea of what a car's supposed to feel like, on Friday morning at Toronto when the track is horrible. They can tell right away whether the car is decent or not. That's the only thing that really a rookie lacks. He has no basis or point of reference for stuff like that. But working with a young, enthusiastic guy like Santi is just as challenging as working with a well-seasoned professional. You've got to be on your game.
Well, we can tell that young Mr. Ferrucci's Instagram game is probably better than most of the veterans. So I've seen his work, his fine work recently in Brooklyn, posing with Honda Civic and various jewelry, and he's got his beard and whatever all trimmed up, trying to look young and sexy. So
I don't Twitter book or face Twitter or anything like that. So you're talking to a Luddite here.
The Insta tweets and the book faces. Yep, absolutely.
That's right.
All right, we got 2 questions to go, Mr. Cannon. First one here is from Don Davis, who is back and says, Michael, I was watching the 2006 Surfers Paradise race recently. I was wondering, what's the leap in electronics between that era's Lola and, say, today's Dallara DW12 in its 2018-2019 configuration? And Don asks, is it akin to the difference between a 2006 flip phone and today's smartphones?
No, and let me preface this by saying, if you watch the 2006 Surfers Paradise race, you got to see my firefighting skills displayed very well. I'm forgetting
what happened there. When did you turn into fireman?
We kind of made a boo-boo on the stop with AJ and sent him with the fuel probe still plugged in.
Oh, that old trick.
Yeah, and so there's this wall of heat, and I jumped off the timing stand and realized the fuel tank was on fire. So I started spraying it, and I put it out, and it relit, and I put it out, and it relit. About the third time that relit, I thought to myself, why am I doing this? And it actually went out. But, no, to answer your question, I think the electronics, the fundamental electronics in the data acquisition system is quite similar.
Yeah.
The biggest improvement has been the actual coverage around the track. In the past, it was basically radio-based, and if you're out of line of sight of the antenna, then that stuff dropped out. It was a little bit spotty. Now they have what they call LOA, so they have little base stations around the track. So you've got a continuous stream of data. As far as the data that we get, it's very similar to what we used to get on downloads, and the only thing that's really changed is we've just matured in how we manipulate the data.
Let's get to the last question here, and I saved it for last because I liked it just about the most. This comes in from our pal Ryan Terpstra, who says, from Michael, can you walk us through a test day schedule and what the things are that you look at to accomplish? And he says, as an ignorant fan, why isn't it all low fuel and fresh tires? So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the candy, right? Hey, let's send this thing out on 4 gallons or whatever, and, fresh, warm, sticky, brand new tires. We're going to put up great lap times. But why isn't that the mindset? So for some, folks who are trying to understand how you might structure a test day, the things you might do, how do you do that, and why aren't you just chasing candy the whole time?
Well, so like any good experiment, you need to have a control of some sort, right? We do a particularly poor job of it because our control is, it's 5 gallons of fuel or 7 gallons of fuel at this track, but your tires are always degrading. At tests, we try and establish a control level of fuel, establish control levels of various things. Different tracks, you're testing for different things. Well, if I go to Sebring, I'm probably looking at some of my street circuit stuff. if I go to test Laguna, I'm going to test for Laguna because we're racing there. And then every test is different. If you've got 2 cars, you'll divide up things and test various componentry or various ideas as far as setup philosophy. There are definitely test days. We did one in early January that was, for lack of a better description, it was a bit of a throwaway. We weren't happy with our street circuit setup. We had come up with a couple of different alternatives, and so you put those on the car and you run them and tune them a little bit, and they go, okay, fine, stop. Then you put this one on the car, run it, fine, stop. Every test day is different. That's the best way I can put it. Every test day is different. The goal for each test day varies depending on what you think your strengths and your weaknesses are.
And just from a structure standpoint, Ryan, a test day, honestly, is going to will often have bigger ticket items that teams might have been wanting to test, have an inkling that this, whether it's a damper build, whether it's a springing whatever package, ride height combo, a variety of things, geometry, arrangement. These things might be ideas that have come to Michael Cannon or so many others that, in the context of a 45-minute or 60-minute IndyCar practice session at a race event, it's probably not the right time to be doing those things unless you're completely lost. So unless you're having to take a huge swing to try and get back into the window, for the most part, what you're doing, with your run plan during a practice session during a race weekend, it tends to be refinement. You'll run through a variety of sweeps. We'll try this, we'll try that. Thinking you're close to the sweet spot you're looking for, and so you'll kind of work both sides, hoping to get to that, middle point you want to hit. Test day, again, for the most part, depending on where you're going. Hey, we haven't been to Laguna in forever. So we got a lot to learn because this is new information compared to if you're going to be testing at, Road America, for example. That track in and out, but there might be some new things that you've come up with, ideas you've had. There might be some changes. Who knows? Firestone has a slightly different tire. Your engine manufacturer might have something that could, affect performance a little bit in some way that you're wanting to quantify. So many of these things, Ryan, are about, hey, we have cars that are pretty darn close to similar across the paddock. What ideas do I have that might work, or my driver's ideas, assistant engineer, who knows? What kind of good ideas can we structure in a test to prove or disprove their value? And if we find something we like, then okay, we're going to keep pushing. That might be something you continue working towards that day, or you might table that for your next test. But you've used the word iterative a couple of times, Michael, and that's, I would say, very much the mindset in how you're structuring, one test here, one test there, constantly evolving.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, it is. It's always evolving. And actually, to speak of the sessions, they talk about, you've got a practice session, sweep these things. That doesn't actually happen. You've got 45 minutes. You're lucky if you get 4 outings. So you'll start the session on a brand new set of tires. You'll baseline the car. And the guy comes in and says, okay, this part of the car sucks. So you'll do a change there, and he'll go out and say, no, that sucks more or sucks less. And you'll adjust again. And he goes, okay, that level of sucking is tolerable. And you put a new set of tires on, and you finish the session, and that's it. And so, there's not a lot of sweeping going on. It is, you probably have 2, maybe 3 opportunities to change the car, and that's it. So those sessions are very, very compressed, very pressure packed, and you've got to have a good plan going in. And often you'll have a plan, and the guy will go out. And, you've been fighting rear grip on the car, and you've made an adjustment, and you'll go out there to pit lane with a plan to address the rear grip. And the guy will do a run and come in and goes, oh my God, I've got terrible understeer, and you're just flat-footed. So, there's not a lot of sweeping going on.
Well, that also ties back to close this out, Michael. This also goes back to the conversation we had just a few minutes ago on driver in the loop, but simulation, but also our simulator versus simulation. This, everything you just mentioned about the finite amount of time and the limited number of runs you're going to get to try and improve a car when you roll out at St. Pete, very much speaks to the quality of work that you and your team and every team will do with their own in-house simulation software, knowing that there are so few test days that IndyCar grants. Really, your success, again, at St. Pete, at so many places, it's going to be largely dictated by the quality of simulation work you've done in the shop, because what you've come up with there is essentially what you're rolling out with once, lap 1 is turned Friday morning at St. Pete. And if that is way off, to your point, it's not like you've got hours and hours of running to try and find the problem and fix it. You're playing from behind almost if your simulation work is off a little bit. And every team experiences that too. I mean, that's the thing. Every single team is off somewhere, and you see them scrambling like mad.
You've got to be realistic, right? You've got to temper what you're doing with your simulation programs with everything that you know as well. You've got to understand what is realistic. I remember having this conversation with Tony Cicali once because we were lamenting about something about the simulation program. And Tony, in his infinite wisdom, said, the thing is, you got to understand, in this paddock, we have the collective smarts to get to the moon. The problem is we need to do it on Thursday. That's how we work. I mean, there are a lot of very, very bright people, but there is no tomorrow in this thing. So, you've got to work. You've got to work intelligently, and you've got to stick to the schedule. You've got to be sharpish.
Michael Cannon, thank you, brother. This just reminds me that we need to have you on more often, because I know folks are going to love what they have learned from your wise words. And we need to do this more often, my friend, because it's fun talking the engineering and technical side in addition to whatever our driver friends and otherwise might offer.
All right. Well, I appreciate you giving me a ring, and I apologize for all my fellow dorks.
And should we tell folks that there's a fine Polaroid photograph we're hoping to use at St. Pete to cause your driver to maybe go pee in his pants a little bit?
I need to go to jail again. Oops, did I say again?
We'll, maybe we'll let you in on that one, hopefully. I might have to do some creative blurring and photo editing there, but...
the really terrible thing is, that's not the most embarrassing episode in my life. I have many, many more.
Yeah, all I can say, dear listeners, is sometimes when you're looking through stuff from back in the day and you open up a folder, you're like, oh, this should have some fun memories and photos, and in it you find a photo of Cannon bare naked covering his private parts with his driver's helmet.
Yes.
And I might have been the one to take the photo for all I know, but I'd forgotten about it. But we'll see if we can.
I believe you might have been. The highlight of that thing was getting the phone call like 3 days later. I pick up the phone, and it's Mark, and he goes, he doesn't even introduce himself. There's just this voice at the end of the line. He goes, our housekeeper opened the box, right?
Oh, my goodness. Poor Mark Hotchkiss. Little did he know. He came in such a nice young lad at Genoa Racing and left a fairly hardened, embittered man. But, we'll see if we can use that photo just to scare the living daylights out of Santino. So I think the goal is to tape it to his steering wheel when he climbs in at some point. And, he will see his race engineer from a different angle. That is for darn sure.
Indeed. And I have some pictures of some other angles, too, that he could probably use.
No,
right.
No. And with that, tip your wait staff, enjoy the veal, and thanks again, my brother, for spending some time here.
Indeed, my pleasure. Talk to you soon, Marshall.